So how many of you all have heard of this place called Bannerghatta? Do you know what Bannerghatta means? Okay, so you're saying that Bannerghatta, if you go to Bannerghatta, you see animals that are in captivity. In fact, may I use that word? Sort of, okay. Semi-captive? Okay, great. Okay, so keeping that thought in mind, don't slip off that Bannerghatta thought. Let me come back to my talk. So I call my talk as, well, I was asked by Karishma and team to stick to this month's theme called the context. And it's a very interesting theme, and I was trying to figure myself as to how I can talk in context to the context of Creative Mornings this month. So my context will be about identity in context of, say, the elephant or the context of Bangalore, or in the context of what I'm going to speak about, elephants. So I'm talking about managing a mammal, a huge, big mammal like the elephant in a metropolitan city. So I title my talk as the Postcode elephants. Now this is a very cynical term. Now what is a postcode? What does a postcode generally refer to? It means there is a sense of identity. A lot of my work has been in villages, and it continues to be in villages. So I stay out of a national park, and my office is there, and most of my work, I'm glad that some of my colleagues are there, Jaishankar is there, Dilip is there, and all of us pretty much do a lot of work in villages. And when we go to villages, the first thing that we ask is, you have elephants, especially around Bannerghatta National Park, you have a lot of elephants. And the immediate response that we get from villagers are they don't like them because there are several reasons. And then there is the forest department. I'm sure that most of the forests in this country are managed by the Ministry of Environment and Forests, so forests are managed by them. And when we ask them about elephants, they don't own them, they say we don't want them. So my elephants that I study don't have a sense of identity, okay? No one wants them, the people don't want them because of certain reasons, the forest department don't want them because of, again, another set of reasons. So I feel that some of the elephants that I study don't have a sense of identity, okay? But they're very much prevalent in our society, they're very much part of Bangalore. Can we all, by the end of this talk, own these elephants? Can we give a sense of identity to them and say that, yes, they're part of us? Can you see these names highlighted? Rowdy Ranga, Siddha. They're also on social media. So this is like a conundrum. So I was talking about my elephants not having an identity. And then you find them all over the place. They're on the news. They have their own hashtags, like hashtag Siddha, Like, what is that? And then you probably have photographs, save the Ranga elephant, save Namma Siddha. So they're very much prevalent in at least in the context of Bangalore. But why are these elephants not wanted by anyone? Why are these elephants not revered or accepted by the so-called populace of Bangalore next? Well, it's always good to understand a fair background about the subject that we're dealing with. Having worked with elephants for so long, and I still believe very honestly that I don't know much about them. A quick snippet of how this so-called culture, which translated into elephant knowledge and literature and science. So the first book that pretty much existed in terms of culture and folklore was a very fine book that was written by Eddington. It talks about the elephant in the context of the culture, the Lord Ganesh and its reverence, and the sage Palkapya, who was in some sense the true elephant conservationist of our time. Until 1997, when Ajay Desai spoke about behavior about elephants, because by now we have close to about 4 decades of knowledge on the elephant, scientifically. And of course, we've had an association with the animal for more than about 1,000 to 2,000 years. So this is something that you'll probably want to read if you like elephants. These are very exhaustive books. And this is a very interesting photograph that was clicked in Jerusalem. I think this was an elephant trying to attack a feline. This goes back 1,600 years ago. And then you have another photograph where the Mughals, at that time, these animals operated as war machines. You can see that bull attacking a horse, and you can notice that he's leaking in the temples. It's always associated that bull elephants, when they're in heat or in must, they tend to be more aggressive. So that's a very classical painting way back in the 16th, 17th century. So what I'm trying to say is that whether we like it or not, it's a fact that we have to believe that today we've had at least about close to 2,000 years of our association with the elephant, okay, at least in the Indian context. And this is the only true species that is from India, a species that, of course, we had 2 species which one ended up in Africa, one ended up in Asia, but if you have to really literally say the only wildlife in India that is truly native to this landscape is the Indian elephant. Okay, now, so quickly to understand what the little that I know of elephants, what they do. So this is a beautiful shot in Bannerghatta. It's a beautiful lake, and then just outside the gallery forest, in the bamboo understory, you have these group of elephants coming and drinking water. Nothing to explain elephant biology by just looking at this photograph. So what is this elephant about? What does it do? How much does it eat? What does it need? What is its daily requirements next? So they need about 100 to 150 kgs of green fodder. In tropical dry deciduous forest where I come from, they feed to about 67 species of vegetation. Well, they need about 100 to 200 liters of water. That's how much they need for their metabolic needs. Shelter, otherwise rest or discourse, is just about 4 to 5 hours. So if you've ever seen an elephant, in any context, you'll probably see them feeding all the time, right? Have you seen an elephant doing anything else? No, they'll only be feeding or drinking water. So the forage species are largely selected on two types. So they only feed on green fodder that has nutrient value, and in some cases they also look at palatability. And because they have poor thermoregulatory mechanism, which means unlike us, they can't sweat. Well, they don't have sweat glands, so they need to constantly keep themselves cold by spraying water on themselves or drinking water. Different for different seasons, because in a forest ecosystem, these resources are not standard, unlike us in a society where you can just call up someone and you get some food. So elephants have to constantly keep moving in order to get these resources next. So let's look at their families, how they are structured, and look at their social organization. So this is probably a herd or a family group. So let's try and decipher this family group. So elephants are matriarchal, which means that they're largely led by the oldest female, which means the knowledge of that family is rested in that individual female. So which means decision making, governing, foraging area, seasonality, all of that is decided by that one individual, primarily because of the experience that she has. And the males are just largely limited to reproduce, or rather reduced to reproduce, which means that they are kept in the family for a certain age till they are sexually mature, and after that the oldest female says, please go away. This is a brilliant way of preventing inbreeding. It's nature's way of saying go away, because otherwise you'll have the male end up mating with a full sister, or sometimes in cases in captivity you see that the son always tries to mate with the mother. So they live in a multi-tiered social organization structure, which means you have several females, largely governed by the matriarch. You have a sister, you have an aunt, you have a cousin, and it's linear. So based on the group size, you have different classifications. You call them clan, you call them herd. Well, in the African context, these numbers increase. So, but the basic unit of an elephant society is the mother and the calf, because that's how it starts. If we call ourselves social, what is the strategy? What is the benefit of being in a group? Largely to avoid predation in the context of an elephant. Or in the other societal context is largely for protection. We live with our family primarily because we get protection, we get support, and goes on, in the humankind. And there is also a very interesting part, because in a social species, always is about the child. It's always about taking care of the young one. And in many cases, well, this is debatable. We also see allo-mothering, which means that if there are two lactating females with two calves, you can have one mother feeding both the calves, despite not being the own child. So all these things are largely to improve survival chances in order to ensure that the best individual is achieved in the population. In the Asian elephant, I'm sure many of you all know, the males have tusks, the female don't have tusks. So that's one of the features in which we differentiate between male to female. And also you have something known as a makna, which is a male elephant without tusks. So this is, well, again, these are quite challenging in field conditions to identify, because the tusk is nothing but the incisor teeth, so it's pretty much there in both male and female, just that in the male it's much more prominent, unlike that of the female. So in the Asian elephant, there's also a report that the degree of relatedness is less, because they might not be genetically related to each other to a larger degree compared to the African cousins, primarily because most of these population of elephants that we have in India are all reduced populations. So there's not much of genetic exchange. This is largely due because of the kind of fragmentation the forests have gone through, especially in elephant landscapes. When you're looking at calving, well, they have a long gestation period for about 18 to 24 months. Sometimes to some extent it goes to more than 2 years. And they have an intercalving interval about 4 to 5 years, which means that mother gives birth to a calf, the calf suckles for about 2 years, then another 2 years, and then the female is ready to, give birth again. So In elephants, the females give birth till they die, so there's no question of menopause like we have in our societies. And again, a very short estrus, just to about 2 to 3 days when the female is receptive, and only then they conceive. So looking at an animal of this complexity, but if you look at its reproductive strategy, I would rate it as very poor. So for an elephant, in order to perpetuate and survive, it's quite a challenge by the very virtue of its existence. So that's a classification, so you can see those colors there. So that's an adult female. I would assume that to be the matriarch. Then the other adult female would be the full sister. The green one would be a subadult female daughter, probably the daughter of the full sister. And the juvenile male could be the son of the matriarch, and then you have a calf. We don't know the sex of it because sometimes it's very hard to sex calves. So like us, so I might be drawing parallels to us, so please don't get offended, but I'm just trying to make it much more easier to understand. So let's look at the elephant profile. The elephant profile is pretty much like us. So very in the commonest sense, we tend to look at elephants like their livestock. All of them look the same, they move together, they're just nothing like sheep. But looking at these photographs, you can actually make out individuals. So they're like us, they have identities. Some of us are dark, some of us are fair, some of us have brown hair, and you can clearly make out that there are certain distinguishing features between both of them. And then you have the male, which the most distinguishing feature is the tusk, the presence or the absence of the tusk. So what I'm trying to say is that elephants can be identified individually. They also behave very individually or individualistically. Well, how do you classify them? Pretty much in field conditions, we use height as a standard reference. Of course, there are other body morphological features that can be used to age an elephant. So pretty much you can see 3 classes of elephants there. That's an adult female based on height, which is probably about 7 feet, and then you have the juvenile male, and then you have a juvenile female. So we always take this is a photograph there trying to look at standard referencing on how we use height as a factor to classify elephants. But this again cannot be done with wild elephants, so we use structures like that check dam step there where we can relate the height and probably gauge the age of the elephant. So these are important tools for us to understand what this animal is all about. Of course, if you have to know someone, you need to know how old they are, whether they're male or female, what are they doing. So it's pretty much important that we understand elephants at this capacity next. So if you know the Indian subcontinent, down south, the elephants are distributed across the country. Then you have the southern population, which is that beautiful landscape, which spread across 3 states of Karnataka, Tamilnadu and Kerala. This is called the Brahmagiri-Nilagiri Eastern Ghats landscape. Starts from Brahmagiri, goes up, so it's like a big U. So this is a very important landscape. It's about close to 15,000 square kilometer in area, and this is probably the only place in India that can ensure the future survival of elephants. You have close to about 13,000 elephants in this landscape. And then look at the map on the right. So you have the southern population, which goes further down towards the western Ghats. I don't know, I'm sure if you can look at the western side, and then you have these broken hills, and then you have the gap between the northern western Ghats and the southern western Ghats, which go further into Agastya Malay Periyar landscape. And then you have on the landscape towards the central east, which is pretty much your Orissa, Chhattisgarh, Bihar and that area. And then you have the northeastern landscape, which is your Assam, Sikkim, Mizoram and those areas. Then you have the northwestern landscape between Uttarakhand, Uttaranchal, and of course we have elephants moving into Himachal even now. So this is pretty much the distribution of the elephants across the country. So my work has largely to do with this landscape, the Nilagiri, the Brahmagiri-Nilagiri Eastern Ghat landscape. If you can just press next. So the landscape that I work is there. So it's the northernmost tip of the Eastern Ghats in the state of Karnataka, and that's probably the end of the Eastern Ghats in southern India. After that, the Eastern Ghats go up to Orissa, but this contiguous track of the Eastern Ghats stops at Bannerghatta National Park. So it's pretty much a very important habitat, at least in terms of defining the elephant range. And like I said, this landscape is typically a tropical dry deciduous forest, and I said it holds the largest population of Asian elephant, not only the Asian elephant but also the tigers. So you have close to over 400 tigers that operate in that area. So it's a very, very important site for conservation of these 2 charismatic species. Next. Now coming to the landscape that I work. So we're in Bangalore. So you can see Bangalore on the map. South of Bangalore, just about 20 kilometers from here, is the Bannerghatta National Park. Now, many of you all say Bannerghatta is a place where animals are kept in cages. It's not. So, very often Bannerghatta gets confused with the zoo, which is called the Bannerghatta Biological Park. I'm talking about a protected area network, which is intact forest, which has wild animals. So this is the landscape that I work in. So if you look at the map, it's very funny. It looks like a monkey's tail. It's highly fragmented, primarily because you have Bangalore city so close to it. The northern part of Bannerghatta National Park is very much part of Bangalore municipal limits. It's about 260 square kilometers in area, and it is contiguous to the south to other protected areas in the state of Tamil Nadu and the state of Karnataka, Kaveri Wildlife towards the east. In Tamil Nadu called the North Kaveri Wildlife Sanctuary, and then towards the west, the Kaveri Wildlife Sanctuary. And the landscape is abound by the leopard, the Indian leopard, the dhole or the Indian wild dog, the gaur, which is a very important grazer in tropical dry deciduous forests. Then you have the sambar, which is another deer, which is a very important prey species for the tiger. Then you have the cheetal, which is a spotted deer, again a grazing species. The tiger and the honey badger. Now, I may want to say this, that this is perhaps the only national park in the world that has a wild tiger and a wild elephant so close to a protected area, so close to a metropolitan city. Nowhere else in the world would you find these two charismatic animals that are the flagship for conservation so close to Bangalore. How many of you knew this? So, we're looking at these two species competing with 8 million people and in a roughly about 700 square kilometer area. This is Bangalore city, being the third populous city. So you can imagine the kind of pressures that could exist on this important landscape, an important ecosystem. So that's Bannerghatta National Park. Coming to the elephants that I've been studying, so this is based on the Project Elephant results. We've been conducting population estimation exercise, which Dr. Jaishankar and Dilip are very actively part of. So we've had a stable population since 2002, going up till 2012. We've also recently launched the results of 2017's elephant census, but it's not complete, so I've used the past estimates. So the sex ratio is very important. So it has a sex ratio of 1:2, which is fairly indicative of a very good population. It's probably the observed sex ratio, not the operational, indicating that the ratio between male to female is fairly balanced. And among the least skewed, because if you go to fancy national parks like Nagarole and places like that, your sex ratios go up to 1:30, clearly indicating that something is wrong with the population. So there's only one male for 30 females. And then you have an intercalving interval which is less than 5 years, which means that the population is actually breeding, and a birth rate of say about 2.2 calves a year, which is pretty much quite good, despite the kind of challenges that these animals go through. And you have a group structure representation where there's adults largely occupies the larger chunk of the population, which is again indicative of the fact that the elephants are doing really well to some extent. So now what is the problem? Human-elephant conflict. I'm sure you must have been aware that animals go through a lot of challenges. There's poaching, there's habitat fragmentation. But we also realize that in the 21st century, the biggest challenge for the conservation of Asian elephant is the human-elephant conflict. Now this is emerging to be number one, where maybe 30 years ago, 3 decades ago, it was always poaching because elephants were selectively killed for their tusks, their skin, their hide, their bones. But human-elephant conflict is one of the biggest challenges today to conserve the Asian elephant and acts as the biggest threat. So it's literally that, there are close to 400 people and at least 100 elephants die each year because of this problem. This is across the country. So at the rate at which we're going with elephants and in the kind of fragmented home ranges across the elephant range states that they are in, we might look at an epidemic with elephants, And in the places that I study elephants, especially in human-dominated areas like that of Bangalore and Tumkur and areas around, we literally lose about 12 people a year. That's like you lose one person every month. Despite the fact that Asian elephants are protected under Schedule 1 of the Wildlife Protection Act, this is like the wisdom of Mrs. Indira Gandhi when she decided to say that I want to protect the tiger, and ultimately all these animals ended up coming into the category of Schedule 1. It receives the highest protection by law. We also realize that when you have forests like Bannerghatta, there are a lot of communities, especially park edge communities, that largely farm for subsistence. So there is immense anthropogenic pressures on the park, largely for collection of forest produce, and also because of agriculture, because you're cutting off forests, converting them into agricultural lands. You're, in some sense breaking the home range. So when you break a home range, the habitat becomes degraded. And when it becomes crops, elephants tend to raid crops. So some of the studies that we've done, we've identified 18 different seasonal crops that are cultivated and damaged. And largely the damage happens when the harvest happens, because elephants are smart, they like taste just like us. So they would end up raiding farms that come into harvest, and that's exactly the time that farmers, also want to harvest their crops, because that's what they worked for. So in Bannerghatta, where I work, a marginal farmer has land area of, on an average of about 2 acres. So 2 acres of ragi, finger millet, which is the predominant crop that is grown. So 2 acres of ragi would be about, say in an acre you would get probably 15 quintals of ragi, pretty much. I mean, you don't get that anymore because that rainfall pattern is gone. So on an average you will get about 12 quintals of ragi. So into 2 it's about 24, and one elephant comes and does that. Well, that's paddy, not ragi. The entire thing is gone. So what happens to the farmer? If he's farming for subsistence, there's no food. His entire food stake is lost for the year. So that's equivalent to poverty. Okay, and who does this? The elephant. Okay, so that is the implications of how it can affect us, and maybe we're not aware of it, but because my work has a lot to do with these people, it's alarming. And these people cannot afford, they're daily wage people, they end up working for daily wage only to substantiate for the food and the kind of loss that they've gone through next. So males have this tendency, rather the right word is propensity, to engage in conflict, which is pretty much going into farmlands, raiding crops, causing depredation. And they can go to extents like, which I myself cannot believe, like the areas that I study, the national park is here, they end up going raiding crops more than 200 kilometers, operating in an area in 2000 square kilometers, which a mother and a calf cannot do, right? Because a mother is always worried about the calf's security, whereas for the male there's nothing. His only objective is to go eat, become big, come and show himself to the female, and then probably get mate selection. So we've also seen in cases where our elephants, or my elephants, tend to cross plantations, water bodies, roadways, railway tracks, only to what? Only to feed, only to raid crops. And in some cases we've observed where elephants just use forage as forest only as a daytime refuge, which means they don't do anything. They wait till the night sets, come out and raid crops. This is fantastic. I've seen elephants in coffee plantations in Hassan, where the elephant entire day is standing in one place and just starving, not eating anything. Ideally you would see an elephant eating, right, because it needs about 100 kgs of food, but this individual wouldn't eat, only to wait till the night, come out, and then you have your biryani, you have your mutton fried rice and all that outside. So how do they do this, and why do they do this? And it's pretty interesting to understand that. And also it's challenging because the tusker is always in the tight spot, because by doing this it's not easy. You end up getting killed, or you end up getting shot, you end up being captured. So there is a risk that you take. So is this a high risk that you take for a high gain? Or do you take no risk to get no gain, or do you take low risk to get low gain? So these are different combinations in which we start thinking as to why these animals, selectively males, do this. Next. So this is the Mysore State Highway, and this is shot on a CCTV camera. Can you believe this? This is not what Photoshop edit. And it's coming into an orphanage. This is very scary actually. You have children there, you have a 4.5 ton bull just walking like, you don't care what's happening. And then you have this bull there, ends up walking on a new, and goes boom, falls down. This was a newly constructed asphalted road in Kumbalgodu. So what we see right now is this, crop depredation is pretty much seems like this in villages where I work. Banana plantations, ragi stash, papaya. We're seeing a shift from that to walking through construction, breaking water tanks. So what is happening to these elephants? I mean, is this because there's a change in land use, or these elephants have become so rageful that they end up, doing all of this? If you believe in evolutionary psychology, so is elephant behavior established through genetics, or is it established through social? So if I'm a crop raider, do I teach my son, or my son becomes it like I'm a thief, my son is also a thief? Or is it because my son's friend is a thief and my son also becomes a thief? considering that conflict is detrimental for elephants. So are we looking at it in that context? So what do we do about this? How do we stop an animal weighing about 4 tons? In some cases they go up to 5 tons, some big bulls that I've seen at least. So what do we do? What does the forest do? What does the forest department do? What are the stakeholders doing about it? So you have something known as elephant-proof barriers. These are largely physical barrier systems that are in some sense established to curtail movements, especially when they're in a forest. You prevent them into going into human dominated areas in order to avoid any kind of antagonistic relationship or interactions. Next. So you have the elephant proof trench, you have the rubble wall. Next. Then you have the solar fence, which is an electric charged current fence which gives you a mild shock when you touch it. Then you have the spike pillar, which is next. And then you have the railway line barrier, which was first initiated in South Africa in A Rocha National Park. And Karnataka is the first state that ended up adopting this mitigation measure. And see what they do. So you have an elephant breaking off the solar fence because they clearly know that the tusks don't conduct electricity and the basal pads don't conduct electricity. And then you have the trench, you slide, it's like a seesaw, you slide, you go out. Then you're walking on roads, you don't care. And then you have the railway line fence, which the elephant is trying to cross next. So this is a bull that we've been studying for quite some time, and he was majorly known to operate outside the forest. I've never seen him in the forest at all, he's always outside. And this is a beautiful video taken by Dilip. So you can see him, that's a solar fence. Just look at his size. Very clearly using his tusk, knowing fully that it won't conduct electricity, doing a closed lip movement because their trunk tips are very sensitive to anything, so they close it like that because just the rough skin is exposed just in case the wire touches. Using his basal pad again, knowing clearly that it doesn't conduct electricity. So he just breaches that and comes back into the national park after the night of raiding. It's like going in the night in a pub and come back home in the morning. Something like that. Okay, so we've also tried some interesting things. We've tried these so-called social barriers because these barriers are very expensive. I'm sure a poor farmer cannot afford that. We've tried experiments like using chili and tobacco, using it and acting as an olfactory deterrent because elephants are very sensitive to smell. And then we have bioacoustic early warning systems which predominantly makes alarm calls or sounds that act like threat for elephants. Clearly none of them have worked to a very large extent. Next. So this is a map of Bannerghatta National Park. So that's the boundary, and these are elephant-proof barriers. So in Bannerghatta we have 8 types of elephant-proof barrier systems. That's on the left, so if you can see the classifications, you have different colors. And then you see on the right, these black dots are breaches, breaks. So we walked across this perimeter, which is about 285 kilometers on foot, and tried and understand where these places are and why elephants are coming out. So that's pretty much scary. So literally all the barriers are erected and all the barriers are broken. So we have a total barrier length of about 337 kilometers, which is about 120% more than the park boundary length, perimeter itself. And in some places we have a break or a breach per meter in a wildlife range called Kodeli. So literally a meter of area would have 4 breaks, And in some cases we have settlements that are inside, these are called forest villages, and those areas elephants again move into these places because they're quite porous. So what am I saying? Am I trying to say that these barriers don't work, or do they work? So based on the study that we've done, we've identified factors that could probably influence porosity in these barriers. One such being natural obstacles, like you have a sheetrock and then you have a railway line. The elephant uses the sheetrock to hop onto the railway line fence. Some logic like that. And in cases where solar fences have not been maintained, the electricity comes down, they use areas that are weak. And then you have cattle and wild pig that also cross. They keep, because of their constant movement, the rocks become weak because of erosion. Elephants tend to use that as a weak spot. So there are multiple combinations in different landscape settings in order for elephants to cognitively decide as to how they can overcome these places. So the God to the devil mantra is pretty much scary. So when I started my work in Bannerghatta, I used to go to a cropland that was raided by elephants, and the farmers would be very happy to say, well, this is Ganesh's blessing, the first crop, let's give it to him. Now if you go and ask them, they'll call it a devil, the menace, it needs to be killed, So this is a study one of my students did. We were looking at perspectives of people. I mean, living with elephants, what is your perspective? What do you think about them? Interestingly, there's about 57% of people who still think elephants are good. which means there is still hope, there is still tolerance. But there is a gender variation. Women are less tolerant than men. I'm not making a sexist statement. I don't know why. Because maybe women realize that if the husband is going to guard crops, for all you know, he might be killed that night by a raiding elephant. Maybe she's more concerned. And what are the reasons for elephants? Because why do they feel the elephant is negative? Because they don't get compensation when the elephant, when a cropland is raided, a loss worth 50,000, you get an ex gratia payment of 3,000. So you're frustrated. Then the very fact that an elephant might raid your crop, the stress itself is something that they're not happy with. So these are probably important indications of how the tolerance levels of communities are, especially when they're abutting elephant landscapes. So let's look at this concept called spatiality versus reality. Okay, so as conservation scientists, we get into this big debate in conferences whether we need to look at landscape level approach or a protected area level approach. Someone says you have to look at a protected area because it's small, it can be managed, and someone says it's landscape that is important because you're talking about genetic viability and things like that. Next. Like I showed you earlier, the Brahmagiri Nilgiri Eastern Ghats landscape. You see Bannerghatta on the right at the northern tip. The entire area is filled with elephants. So if an elephant wants to walk from Bannerghatta, it can walk up to Coorg, probably the shortest distance that it can reach before us. So it's close to 6,000 elephants operating in this area alone. How do we manage them? Can we just manage elephants in that small little park like a so-called zoo and keep them contained, or we don't need to look at this entire landscape as a population because genetically it's important to secure the species? Well, this is the crop compensation claim for 2013-14. You can see that there is a dip in conflict. So very interesting. I mean, if you go to policymakers, they'll be very happy. My compensation claims have come down, which means it's directly correlated to the levels of conflict. But what is alarming is if you can see the interesting part on the right side, where you can see a distribution map. So ideally what an elephant would do, it's in a forest, goes out and raids, the farmer claims for compensation, it comes back. That's the normal equation. But in 2013-14, this 1 year, we saw a dip in claims because elephants were not raiding. And we wondered whether the elephants had just buckled up and just realized that we don't want to raid, can't be possible. What we realized is the elephants have not been in forests at all, they moved away. So the 70% of these elephants' home range are outside forests. So if you look at the yellow layers, these are areas where elephants have never gone, never been reported. 100 years, 200 years, no archival history to say that elephants north of Bangalore from Tumkur and places, if you're there, you probably would have never heard of elephants as a child, your grandfather would have never seen. But so literally these elephants have left these so-called forests, which they're technically supposed to belong to, because we always believe that wild animals live in forests. But this is not true for the elephants that I study. They're away from the protected area, raiding crops in places that have never ever seen elephants. People would see, I remember there was a story when elephants moved into Andhra Pradesh. A population of 25 elephants back 25 years ago moved into Andhra Pradesh from Hosur. The chief minister went to welcome the elephant with a banana, saying that, well, Andhra Pradesh has got elephants, and they declared Kaudanya Wildlife Sanctuary as an elephant sanctuary because of that. So this is Bannerghatta associated with two adjoining landscapes. To the east you have North Kaveri Wildlife Sanctuary, on the west you have Kaveri Wildlife Sanctuary. So this landscape is pretty much important. It holds roughly about 500 elephants in a 2,000 odd square kilometer area. And you see all these dots, these are enclosures. So there is pretty much human domination in these areas, largely causing conflict. So this map I was able to get it from the US Army base. It's a map of Bannerghatta in 1954. So you can see that map on the left. Can you see how small Bangalore is that time? The yellow there, 1954. Then look to your right. This is a map from the Forest Department website in 2014. Can you see the red? That's Bangalore. And can you see Bannerghatta in the green? It's almost reduced half its size, perhaps less than half. So if you can take these two analogies, in less than 60 years, pretty much, this landscape has changed. Now 60 years is one elephant's lifetime. They live as long as we do on an average, 60 years. So imagine a calf that was born in 1954, seeing its home tarnished into half. So conflict is something that can be thought of inevitable because there's no space. So this is a very much, which is an alarming thing, because you see there's so much of agriculture, so much of built up area, so much of land use change, that where are these animals supposed to go? There's no space. Let's look at some poster boys of Bannerghatta. This is Linga, this is Siddha, this is Kalinga, and this is Ranga. These are not captive elephants, these are wild elephants. And like I said, when I said personalities, all of these guys have their own personalities. They have individual needs, they have individual conflict behaviors, they have individual mate selection practices. Well, they have an individual way of life. Next. So we call them alliances, or when I was in Singapore, I was talking and someone used this word called bro mass, these boys, bachelor groups, hanging out together. So these colors are pretty much indicative of, we lost Siddha last year, Ranga has been captured, and two of them are still in Bannerghatta, very much alive or there in the forest. So when these guys combine with each other, they have different ways of behaving. So say Jai Shankar and I go for crop raiding, we probably eat about 100 kgs, but if I go alone, I eat about 20 kgs, because we have probably cooperative groups which relate based on social learning, where we try and enforce our identity through something else. So that's pretty much how we operate in society as well. Is nature trying to weed out the dads from the cads, or is the sperm actually cheaper than the egg? Are we trying to literally lose males in a population for certain reasons, or are we trying to secure the males in a population for certain reasons, if we talk about natural selection and things like that? So this is an elephant family, like I explained earlier. So you have the subadult male, which after it reaches puberty at around 12 to 13 years, it's slowly pushed off to go away, try to find your own mate or try and establish your own bachelor group and things like that. So this male becomes an independent adult, which means he is breeding, he is sexually active, sexually mature is the right word. And then what he does, he tends to form transient groups, which means that he's away from his family, he doesn't know what to do, he doesn't know where to eat. So he tends to join his buddies who are also thrown away. So you might have group 1, group 2, group 3, and both of them disperse these young males outside. They tend to form so-called bro mass or the bachelor groups or the male alliances, and they tend to form a small family by themselves. And what do? So say subadult 1 joins subadult, adult 1, adult 2, adult 3, all these male elephants basically tend to join together. Next. So this adult remains in that transient group. Obviously for them, if you look at theory of natural selection, they form, obviously dominance is achieved by size. In any animal kingdom, the biggest and the strongest win. Now how do you become so big and strong? Is probably to cooperate, because you get bulk food, the forest you have to search all the way, but if you go to a ragi patch, maybe in an hour's time you will end up eating about half a ton of food, 3-4 elephants put together. So they all tend to form these bachelor associations. Only objective is to raid crops, largely to improve their body size. Only if they do that can they come back, will a female select. So this elephant tends to join with 3 and they form a bachelor group. So subadult 1 that dispersed long ago is associated with a new male, maybe an adult male, and he tends to learn skills. So I said, remember the thought that I had, whether it's genetically or socially. So he tends to learn skills of crop raiding, become more bold, know areas, probably acting as scouts to some extent, trying to look out for new areas to forage. Next. Okay, so he learns the bad trick, and then when he becomes an adult, he teaches a bad trick to 3 other people. Okay, so this cycle continues. So this is called idiosyncrasy, which is peculiar behaviors noted in few individuals with the population. And mind you, let me not look like I'm blaming the elephant to be the bad thing, because conflict is just 10% of an elephant's life. So you have the adult male who is by now an avid crop raider, because some of the elephants that I study only crop raid. They only subsist on cropland food. And then you have them raiding crops. They operate in the same areas where other elephants operate in crop raiding. Or sometimes if they feel that their foraging ground is somewhere else, because they act like scouts, they look at new areas, they end up going. So this is Ranga in the year 1999. So Ranga is a very popular elephant, and he was known to be associated with rage and violence and terror, because a lot of reports of him killing people. In the year 2014, when I remember, there was an order issued by the Chief Wildlife Warden for him to be captured. So that was the time that elephants from Sakrebail camp from Shimoga were brought in for this whole capture operation, and we realized that Ranga was not there. But in 1999, we ended up seeing this photograph, which was taken by Mr. Sanjay, who is also a conservation scientist. And this was a photo of him in Tumkur. So if you look at the map, Bannerghatta to Tumkur is about 90 kilometers. Okay? How did he go there? Where did he go? He would also clearly see there are 2 other elephants that are associated in that Areca nut plantation, right? There's one in between, on the front, on the extreme right, and there's here, and then him. So remember that schematic representation. So he must have associated with 2 other bulls, okay? And he ended up associating with them, left Bannerghatta, went to another area. We thought we lost him, but he was very much active crop raiding somewhere else. And then what happened? Those two elephants later, one was captured, one died, Ranga still remained. I'm talking about 1999. And in 2011 we saw him again, look at his size, back at Bannerghatta. So he's there in his musk, full blown, look at his size. I'm sure no other bull would stand next to him. And he gets the mate value, so he gets to mate whoever he wants, and so what has helped him? All these bulk crops outside. And then in 2015, he's with 11 elephants. So if you remember reading one article, Ranga with a gang of 11, he's with 11 bull elephants, and all of them are learning how to rate crops from him. Okay, and he's standing right, so if you can see that Ipomoea bed, if you go to Tumkur and Guppy, you have water tanks that are about 1,000 acres in size, they're like oceans literally. And then you have this elephant going there, raiding crops, because there's no forest literally, apart from Shivganga and Antarganga areas. So it's only the Ipomoea bed in a large lake. Daytime, they again starve, stay in the water. Nighttime, see the coconut plantations around, raid, come back and hide in the water. No one could do anything. Literally, they would stand in the water, raid. And who taught them all of that? Who taught the 10? It's him. So Bannerghatta National Park is bottom. Look at the routes that they're using. This is crossing 2 state highways, 1 railway track. And if you look at the land use, there's no forest that side. It's only agricultural lands, 14 crops. In Bannerghatta, if you have to raid, you get crops only for 6 months, seasonal crops. But if you go to Tumkur, you get crops throughout the year, so you can imagine how much of food. Okay, and see the sites in Tumkur. You have roads with elephant dung, school compound walls broken. Raiding up till Tumkur. Now we are having another problem from elephants in Chitradurga. You must have read, elephants coming from Bhadra, and it's a big problem. This is in 2016, this year. You can see someone sitting on him. He still hasn't lost his size. He was captured. Okay, he was finally realized that he needed to be captured because it was beyond manageable to keep him in that context, because there were reports of him killing people and all of that. But anyway, we've not seen it, so let me not comment on that. But nonetheless, he's captured. Right now, if you want to see him, you go to Matigod Elephant Camp. He's been trained, still eating with the same appetite that he had as a crop raider, eating much more. Then we had this guy, Siddha. I'm sure you must have read about him in the papers, the elephant that broke his leg. So this was a photograph that I took in 2008. A very young, beautiful adolescent bull. Ended up, again, for the first time, Ranga used to do this for 20 years, going up and down, going to feed, coming back to mate, go to feed, come to mate. This guy for the first time, last year, the year before that, decided, let me also try this. Again, personalities don't match, maybe what worked for Ranga cannot work for Siddha, right? Remember that video where he slips? Okay, so this is us trying to treat him. We have meloxicam tablets in banana because we thought it was a swelling. We tried as much as we could. He had a very long haul. This was on 30th July 2016. He had a compound fracture on the front foreleg. We sedated him, tried to tranquilize him. His fracture was beyond repair. There were a lot of people trying to give a lot of different suggestions, because please understand, fractures cannot be treated in elephants. On 9th December 2016, we lost him. Because there was septicemia. You can see the right foreleg that was blown. So this is another fabulous breeding bull of Bannerghatta, very close to my heart. I monitored him for about 10 years of my life. Lost him to a very stupid instinct of trying to crop raid. So this is the plight of male elephants across the country. So you see, all of them are males. Such fabulous tusks. All these are genetic traits. We're losing all these animals because of crop raiding. So what have we been doing as an organization associated with the Bannerghatta National Park? So we've been doing a lot of scientific exercises to try and understand the population status, something like the dung decay rate experiment, which is pivotal in assessing the elephant population number. We didn't know where elephants were, so we used to do workshops with the frontline staff, people who work in the grassroots, in the forest, largely to empower them to try and understand where elephants are, because only where you know elephants are can you manage them, right? So that's Jayshankar again training a team of volunteers. We have a lot of volunteers and students who work with us, largely on these exercises where you bring in scientific temper in order to improve their contribution towards conservation. A lot of training programs for people, outreach exercises on scientific methods, conflict management and things like that, in order to empower people who are actively contributing to elephant management and conservation. Then of course the assessment of the railway line barrier, we do this every 5 years. So if you guys want to have a long walk, come with us. We'll probably walk the longest, 280 kilometers. Try and understand where these areas elephants are and what can be done to prevent them from raiding crops. Next. Awareness and outreach, which we haven't really been effectively doing it in the city, but again reaching out to schools, colleges, children to try and bring in this knowledge to them, because they're not very far from Bangalore, and it's imperative that they contribute to the efforts that are taken. Well, we also do a little bit of ex situ treatment. This was Siddha again when he had his tail being bitten off by another elephant. Tail biting is a very common thing when elephants are sparring. So for the first time we tried to treat it, by giving it some antibiotics, and that was a fantastic recovery. Unfortunately we lost the animal itself, but his tail was bitten. We published a paper. So something like this, when elephants get into injury or some anthropogenic reasons or natural, we try and do some kind of treatment next. And what most importantly is the people of Bannerghatta, the park edge communities. It's important to sensitize them, at least go to them and reach, because sometimes in my work I'm stuck between two people, one villagers on one side and the forest department on the other side. Both of them cannot stand each other. So I end up in some sense facilitating that dialogue. So that's Dilip again talking to a lot of villagers, trying to understand their challenges, how we can work cooperatively to solve this problem, because in no way you can remove the elephants. I mean, they have the right of life as much as we do. So somewhere we need to balance that argument. We have a lot of students who come from different universities, different institutions, and we conduct these small research projects, trying to look at specific concerns, like looking at perspective, looking at economics of conflict. These ultimately help managers to take right decisions, especially the forest department, to try and empower them to take the right decision, primarily with information that has scientific temper. And of course the railway line fence, which was again, we've been erected in Bannerghatta National Park, the second in the state of Karnataka. That was, after Addo, this is the only place that has it. So we were able to establish this, and because of our recommendations in certain areas, elephants don't move into villages. And trying out different ways, like someone said chili plantation, tiger urine, beehive fencing, all these are different ways, because you're dealing with a cognitively intelligent species, so you need to come up with different ways to deter them in order to try and prevent conflict, at least in that area, not to make it a landscape phenomenon, but can localize conflict to certain areas. So the study that I am part of is the longest study on Asian elephants in Bannerghatta National Park, and that long-term data has been collecting. So we've been monitoring individuals, population, looking at trends, looking at mortality, looking at natality. Gives you a sound understanding of how the population can be managed at the long run. And capture taming, yes, that's Ranga and Akral. We ended up had no option but to capture him. So monitoring him, ensuring that his welfare in captivity is right, the right food intake is given to him. So this was a project that was given to us. We did this for about 6-7 months. Dilip was again a very active part of that. And dry season, drought, like I said, seasonality is a very important concern in forest ecosystems. We have drought. Last year was a severe drought in Bannerghatta. So we ended up creating troughs. And that's a camera trap image of elephants actually using that water. And we also use technology, like I said, especially camera trapping. I think many of you all know, we use camera traps to monitor elephants in areas where they're bound to come, especially to try and reinforce whether our study animals are using this area, that area, why it's happening, what they're eating, and see what they do to camera traps. It's an infrared light, you can't even see a flash. Camera traps are invaluable sometimes because they're non-invasive, because otherwise when we're in the forest, animals can detect us. But camera traps covertly do that job, but sometimes they go through this problem. So this is a report that we had written in the 1st of December to the Chief Wildlife Warden, largely a short note on human-elephant conflict, looking at ex gratia compensation, erecting elephant-proof barriers next, improving quality of habitats like dry season management, and encouraging scientific research on human-elephant conflict. So we're looking at conflict not just from a sense of negative interaction between people and elephants, or people and wildlife in general, but there are a lot of things associated with it, okay? So I'll just end by a quick story. I was in Tumkur once, and again monitoring my elephants there, and I ended up visiting a family which had apparently lost a son, and I wasn't aware I was in that village. And this was at around 8 o'clock in the morning. Tumkur again, not an elephant habitat, no elephants around, but these gang of 11 ended up using that area. A child of about 8, 9, 10 years around, wearing a school bag, walking on a cart road, getting ready to school. The father was a daily wage, mother's a handicap. So the male child, the male child value, right? The kind of resources that the family were thought of was to primarily ensure that he studies and so that he can be the breadwinner of the family. 8 o'clock in the morning, walking on the road, a 3-ton bull comes and rams him. Okay, he dies. And I ended up going in that house and talking to that mother. The forest department will give you a compensation, about 5 lakhs, and probably they'll say that's it. And talking to this lady, I realized, having worked for elephants 10 years, being on this side of the fence, trying to say save elephants, save elephants, I begin to think from the other side of the fence, because if you want these animals to survive, you need people. and there has to be a dialogue. So how would you justify the loss for that mother? Is 5 lakhs justifiable to put a value to that child's life? No. So human-elephant conflict today is all of that. It's poverty, it's loss of a young one, it's loss of an elephant, so there are a lot of things. And in today's society, we put value to everything. We love putting value to everything. So the economic value, what is the value of a tree? So can we posit an intrinsic value to human-elephant conflict today? Okay, with that I will end. Thank you so much.